Welcome to Roots and Rishte, a podcast focused on all things South Asian mental health.
We are your co-hosts, two psychologists in the field who are also work besties, wanting to invite you to join us as we speak about patterns and dynamics we see in our clinical work.
We want to have the serious conversations, the topics which are taboo and whispered about, but we also want to celebrate the joys and wins that we experience on a daily basis.
There will be practical applications we hope you can implement in your day-to-day life, which is not like your typical auntie's advice. And just a quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute as a therapeutic relationship or therapeutic advice. Should you want to work with us, please reach out. Welcome to Roots and Rishte podcast. I'm Dr. Ambreen Basria, clinical and counseling psychologist and founder of Teston Psychological Services.
I'm Dr. Simrat Padda, clinical and counseling psychologist and the founder of Room to Grow Psychological Services. Hi, Ambreen.
Hi, Simrat.
So today we are going to be talking about boundaries. In a previous episode, we had talked about enmeshment. And so just to start off this episode, we just want to sort of talk about what the difference between enmeshments and boundaries are. So when we talk about enmeshments, we're talking about lack of boundaries. And when we talk about boundaries, now we're going to be talking about intentional limits, right? And kind of how we can recognize maladaptive patterns and start to set some intentional limits.
So as you were saying, Simrat, right? Like, boundaries are clear lines, right? And I actually often talk about this in sessions with clients too. Sometimes boundaries are direct and sometimes they're indirect. But I think the most important piece about this is boundaries does not equate to disrespect.
Yeah. And I think that that's a misconception that happens quite frequently when we use the word boundaries. I think a lot of times people take the word boundaries and they interpret it as disconnecting or separating from a person or a dynamic. And that doesn't have to be the case. And ideally, it's not the case, right? It's once again about the integration, but being able to be more aligned to your values and what's important to you.
And how many of us have used the word boundaries and suddenly gotten the reaction,
Yeah.
This is the worst thing in the world, right? Like such a reaction from our maybe families, from our elders, from others around us, right?
Yeah.
And it's so important to kind of understand this, that, you know, setting boundaries is not something that is coming from a place of a lack of love. It's actually supposed to enhance relationships. It's actually supposed to bring relationships together closer. It's actually supposed to establish meaningful time and connection for those relationships to honor the value of what they bring to your life.
Yeah, so really healthy dynamics can still work on boundaries, right?
Absolutely.
And really, and like it doesn't have to, like you said, be that maladaptive sort of take on it. And another word that I sometimes use for boundaries is parameters, because I think it's kind of the same thing, right? It's just kind of setting a little bit sort of around you in a way that feels better for a person, if that makes sense.
I like that. I like that, right? Like, what are the parameters for the relationships that we want to have in our life, right? And what are the parameters for interaction and engagement that we want to have in our life?
In a South Asian dynamic, boundaries can look like things like unsolicited advice, constant checking in, lack of privacy, over-involvement. So sometimes boundaries can be in that kind of maladaptive realm as well. But boundaries can also kind of look in ways that are like a little, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like boundaries can also just sort of be naturally in the dynamic, if you will, like without sort of being so maladaptive or so enmeshed, basically.
Right. You know, I think sometimes we have to understand what does the lack of boundaries look like? And then we also then have to look and reflect on how does the boundaries or parameters that we have in place, what does that need to look like, right? And so kind of really understanding this from a perspective of like, you know, where are we drawing some of our lines?
Yeah, and boundaries, they can be physical in nature, like physical sort of boundaries that a person's setting. They can be emotional in nature as well, kind of, you know, I don't have the capacity for this, or this is really heavy for me, or I don't want to get involved in this drama. And you can kind of set those emotional boundaries as well. So there's different ways that boundaries can kind of manifest.
Absolutely. I often kind of talk about this in family dynamics too, where it's like, let's say that your mom is telling you like, hey, Simrat, Can you go tell your brother that dinner is ready?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of like playing this middleman role, right? A boundary can be, hey, mom, I'm in the middle of something. Do you mind letting him know yourself? Can you call him yourself? Right? Like it can be so simple, it can be soft, but it can be clear.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's harder to implement kind of maybe in a South Asian family because there are sort of the cultural expectations of obedience and the collectiveness of sort of like a family unit. Family honors a big one as well, right? So pressure to kind of meet some societal expectations, or even if it's like a family expectation, and setting boundaries. Particularly, if it's with a misconception that boundaries equals disconnect, the idea of setting boundaries can feel really uncomfortable, really scary, really foreign, actually, just foreign generally.
We often use the word izzat, and izzat like translates to respect, but it can be used in so many different contexts, right? Like one of the beauty of our cultures is just how many different contexts one word can be taken in, right? But really kind of looking at this from an angle of like, if you somehow set boundaries, like izzat requires this totality almost of like this totality of respect, right? And like this unconditional regard for that respect, right? And I think what's really important to kind of sit with some of this is that sometimes, boundaries actually kind of enhance respect between dynamics and can actually really promote a actual true level of respect rather than a respect that is generated from a level of obedience.
Yes, yes. And it kind of challenges that all or nothing mentality, right? Like it's not respect or disrespect. Like it's not so binary. Like there can be a middle ground. And I think that's kind of what the boundary is kind of finding what that middle ground is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what these like blurred lines of love and control can look like and what these like blurred lines of like boundaries can look like, right? So it could be, for example, it could be in a marriage relationship, right? And the parents are way overly involved in maybe conflict that you and your partner are having. It could be something seemingly small, but both sets of parents have really large opinions about whatever's happening between the two of you. And that could be the two of you want to have kids maybe a few years later, right? And so now you might be hearing everybody talk about having kids. Like you need to have kids. Maybe kind of giving you herbal supplements. You need to have kids, right? Or having the conversation, I just want to hold my grandchild next year. I'm going to die or something like that, right? Like there's a lot of like guilt around some of this stuff and constant pressure to let go of your needs and wants to adhere to them.
Yeah,
right?
And you're navigating so many different voices, so much kind of noise in something. And it could be something about like kids, it could be, career choices, it could be your living situation, whether you choose to live with in-laws or you choose not to. It could be your finances, like that over-involvement or the noise can be, like it can show up in so many different ways in this dynamic.
So let's also kind of talk about like guilt being that cultural like tool that's almost used, to kind of like encourage obedience and like encourage compliance, right? And really kind of like feeling that sense of guilt. So you're making decisions from a place of guilt rather than a place of like, oh, this is what I'm ready for and this is what I want, right? So really kind of thinking about this from an angle of like guilt is often driving a decision or a level of respect, and it's not coming from like an authentic place for you.
Yeah. And that could have the potential of breeding like resentment, right? In terms of like I feel like I have to do all of this, whatever this is, right? And then, but you don't necessarily want to. And so like we see guilt happen a lot with daughters or even daughter-in-laws, right? And there's this expectation of like kind of the caretaking and the taking care of the home. And if there's children, you're kind of raising the children. But the expectation or sort of the boundary is that, this is something that you have to do.
And so much of what we hear too is like, but I did this for you, right? Like I've done so much for you. I've worked so hard to put you through this X, Y, and Z piece. So how can you not do this?
Yeah.
Right? Like if somebody, for example, is voicing that maybe they want to go to a different kind of a school, maybe they want to change careers, maybe they want to do something like that, right? And suddenly it's like, but how dare you? Like I work so hard to put you through this.
Yeah. From an emotional standpoint, what that could look like is if a child or someone is telling their parents that they're feeling depressed or they're feeling sad, and it can kind of come back to, but like, what do you have to be sad about? You have everything, right? You have the house, you have the car, you have this, you have that, and it kind of dismisses the emotional component of it, and that can feel really uncomfortable for the
Yeah.
individual. So setting that emotional boundary of, I hear what you're saying, but I still feel the way that I feel. And yeah.
Yeah. And then also the other piece to this, it can often look like, for whatever reason, like if we say no, this can actually be taken as disrespect.
Yeah.
Like complete total disobedience, right? Like it's completely disrespectful to say no. However, saying no is actually a very healthy component of being able to kind of exert your own like sense of individual self and your own like emotional autonomy, right? And it's not a disrespect, right? Sometimes it's about protection of your own emotional resources.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the idea that like the younger generation now like does have more exposure to mental health language and mental health sort of just awareness, if you will. And so things like boundaries or saying no have a very different connotation potentially for whoever is saying that versus who's receiving it.
Yes. It's like we're on polar opposites of the spectrum, right? Like one end of the spectrum has the languaging, has the understanding, has the ability to be able to kind of express what is needed.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side where it's kind of like, we've never heard of this before. This has never been done before. I've never set boundaries before.
Exactly.
So why is this now being done to me? And it feels so personal when actually it's not personal at all.
Yeah. And once again, like recognizing that the boundaries being set could be coming from a place of love or anxiety or well intention.
Yes.
Right. And so it's not that, the person who's sort of setting the boundary or the dynamic that has the boundary set is coming from a place of wanting to, close a person off or wanting to stop them from doing things. It's coming from good intentions. Intention versus impact, right?
Absolutely.
It's coming from a good intention, but the impact of it is greater than.
Yeah. And so let's kind of talk a little bit about like consequences of what can happen if you don't have appropriate boundaries in place, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of like shed on this a little bit, like we've kind of touched upon it a little bit. But for example, things that I've seen in my work can be around loyalty conflicts, right? Like, so sometimes, for example, there are a lot of individuals that are coming in and they're, have a romantic interest or want to pursue a romantic partnership with someone that is outside of the faith or outside of the cultural like context of sorts, right? And so what we then end up seeing is that, the parents are really upset about this, right? And so we're kind of seeing that this person has like this split in loyalty of like, okay, I want to make my parents proud. I want to make them happy, but this is a person that makes me happy. This is a person I see my life with.
Yeah.
Right?
So being stuck kind of between the two. Yeah. Burnout is another consequence. So this is something that is so prevalent kind of in the work that we do. But I'm thinking of, like a good chunk of my caseload, they're high functioning, really successful, super emotionally intelligent women. But they're working full time and their mothers and their wives and their daughter-in-laws and their daughters and the responsibilities and the roles and the expectations and the lack of boundaries, the guilt, the shame, all of that is so prevalent. And the burnout is so real because one person only has so much capacity and kind of feel like you kind of have to meet all these other needs because that's the expectation.
Absolutely.
The burnout
Absolutely.
the burnout
It's so real, right? And then I also think that, kind of navigating the space of like, in fact, in like joint family dynamics, right? Like having to set boundaries, like, you might have an idea of what you want for your children to be able to sleep, for example, right? Or eat, or how they eat.
Yeah.
And there are notions that come from other generations where it's kind of like, no, food is love. Like I need to stuff this food down your throat to show you that, you are well fed, right? But it may go against your value and it may go against what you are trying to teach your children, right? So there's a lot of even parenting conflict that comes up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Even sleep training. Like sleep training is a really big one, right? And so a lot of people who live in a dynamic where they are with in-laws or there's older generations in the household, even if they want to, it's difficult for them to sleep train because the resistance to that is so strong, right? The other voices that are kind of coming in are so strong. Yeah. Just being involved in sort of decisions that get made, or kind of having like an emotional sort of um like an emotional sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like buy-in to situations, right? And so when we talk about parents, for example, and the idea of over-involvement, we see that happen so much with marriage, right? And so when, a person gets a certain age, then the talk about marriage can become so prevalent of, you got to find someone, or you're not with someone, or we need to find you someone, and the pressure that can kind of come in. But the involvement, I think, is where the boundary gets blurred, right? When parents are, I don't know, like whatever they're doing.
It's like the conflict, right? Like it's a conflict between what you really want and what they really want, and then you having to give up what you want to accommodate what somebody else wants, right? So it's like you might have this desire that you want to kind of date other people, you want to maybe explore what your options are, you don't want to have the arranged marriage that your parents have picked out for you, right? And it's like you're having to give up your desire for what you want because their desire for what they want at that particular time is prevalent.
Yeah. And once again, like it could be coming from a place of well intention on their part, right? Like they're just concerned, or they have some feelings about it. But it is kind of, how do you navigate what feels important to you versus what feels, what they feel like is important. So kind of like a personal example that comes to mind. So I was in California for the doctorate program. I was quite far away from my family. And I was around the age where it's time to get married. And so the conversations were really starting in the household. And my dad, who is fantastic, but a little bit overzealous, he was like totally like into like, who are you talking to? How long have you been talking to? How's it going? Like constantly like following up on it. And then when I started talking to my now husband, the pressure of what he was kind of putting on me unintentionally, like was so, like he wasn't meaning to, but the pressure was so strong. And I told him, I was like, you are not allowed to ask me a single question about him until I come to you. And he was like, okay. And so for 2 months, this poor man could not ask me, and he respected it, that he did not ask me a single question about how it was going with him. Every single night he would come home and ask my mom, hey, did Simrat call? Has Simrat told you anything? So he respected the boundary because it was so important to me. And I mean, it all turned out, and I married the man, and it's all great. But I remember that was like one boundary that I set where it was just kind of like, no, this is you're stressing me out. Unintentionally, but you're stressing me out, so you can't do this. And he was like, but that's exactly what it is, right? Like boundaries don't have to be in always unhealthy dynamics, or it doesn't have to be in, go ahead, yeah.
I love that. I love that example because I think it's such a great example to kind of explain that boundary setting really comes from a place of love, right? And a place of respect, right? It's not just about respect as a one-way street. It's really respect as a two-way street, right? Like your dad did such a great job of like really being able to kind of sit with the boundary that you set and like really kind of go, okay, I have to give this respect to her, right? Like it's a mutual respect. It's a two-way street. And that's such an important concept in boundary setting too, is that boundary setting is not about disrespect at all. It's really coming from a place of love, a place of connectedness, a place of like, I'm going to share something with you. I'm going to be vulnerable with you, but I need the time to process what I'm ready to share.
And maybe another way to also put that is boundaries is also self-preservation, right? So boundaries is saying this dynamic right now is stressing me out, right? Or I don't have the capacity to engage in this dynamic, or, I'm burning out and I can't do it all. And so setting the boundary, it's self-preservation. It's your way of kind of saying this is too much and it's not serving me. And so how can we navigate this?
Right. And I think this kind of really goes right into like, what are the healthy ways to kind of start setting boundaries, right? And really kind of sitting with that reflection of like, how do we kind of navigate some of these boundary settings, right? Because I think most of us kind of feel like boundary setting has to be like direct. It has to be clear. It has to be rough, right? It's not. It's actually so loving, right? Like if you have a parent, for example, like I've seen this happen so many times, a parent will call 5, 10 times a day, right? And go, why didn't you pick up? How are you doing? What's going on, right? And you want to talk about every little thing every 2 minutes, right? And sometimes a boundary that you want to say is like, hey, Mom, I love you so much. And I love talking to you. I'm really in the middle of something right now, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk. So why don't I call you at this time, and we can have a full conversation then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Another version of that boundary is if someone is really lacking the capacity, maybe you don't answer the phone, right? And maybe you answer the phone or you call back later on in the evening or even the next day and just kind of say, like, I was busy. But once again, you're kind of preserving what feels important for you without sort of detrimental consequences that may feel difficult to sort of handle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's a little bit about a give and take. And so the example that I'm going to give is a little bit personal for me too, right? As you guys know, I live in a joint family dynamic. And so we have grandma that's very, very involved. So hi, Dadi Jan. But what I will say is that, as there are boundaries that I set around sweets and how much sweets my kids can eat. And oftentimes Dadi Jan loves bringing home donuts for the kids, right? And so the boundaries sometimes that I set around that is, hey, I get that you want to spoil the kids. I get that you want to make sure that they have their sweets and they love their donuts, right? But we're not going to do a full donut. We'll do half a donut. They both get half a donut. And then we'll reevaluate tomorrow if they get the second half, right? So these are boundaries that I kind of set where, I'm very respectful of the fact that she wants to have this desire to spoil the kids. And so I kind of give and take around how much I'm willing to allow that, right?
Yeah. I love that. Because you're validating kind of what grandma's bringing into the picture, but then you're also kind of holding firm in what feels important to you and and the kids as well.
Yes.
I imagine the kids would just eat all the donuts if they could. But
and I do say we cannot have donuts every day.
Yeah. Once again, perfect example, right, of how we can navigate it in a way that can kind of take account both parties and be respectful.
Exactly. And I think it's also about even when we're kind of talking about the romantic decisions, you gave a perfect example of that, right? So when you are starting to feel this level of pressure from your families, from your parents about making a decision about romantic partnerships, right? Sometimes it's important to kind of say this is such an important decision to make, and who you spend the rest of your life with, or who you're going to intentionally spend the rest of your life with, right? I need some space and time to think about this. Right? And I know that you're here if I need help. I know that you're here if I have questions or concerns, but I need some space to process this.
Yeah. And I think part of managing kind of or working through boundaries is to be able to recognize the guilt that may be coming in and kind of working through the guilt as well, right? And so in some dynamics, it might be easier to set boundaries because the guilt just isn't inherent in that dynamic. And so for in my example, I didn't feel overly guilty for telling my dad to just, take a breather. But there's many dynamics where that guilt is kind of what fuels the actions to continue. And so part of the work is to be able to recognize, that only because you're feeling guilty about something, that doesn't mean that you have to follow through with whatever the guilt is telling you. It can be helpful to kind of learn how to separate yourself from that.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important piece around boundary setting too, is that, we talk about this not being disrespectful. It's not a disrespectful process. Parameters are important. They're necessary to keep people in and to kind of give you space, right? But also what is really important about this is that, boundary setting is done from a place of love. It's done from a place of compassion. And it's done from a place of kindness. We're not raising our voice when we're setting boundaries. We're not yelling or screaming. We're stating how we feel. We're using those I statements of, I feel X, Y, and Z. I need X, Y, and Z, right? This is not a disrespect to the other person. This is not a, I don't value what you have to say. It's just an ownership of what you need. And sometimes what we have to sit with is when that guilt comes up, is that we have to be able to recognize that it is also important for that person to sit with their own emotion, even if they don't like what they're hearing.
Yeah. And sometimes boundaries is at a necessity, right? If there's an abusive sort of dynamic, if there's a toxic dynamic, if there's an incredibly maladaptive one, sometimes the boundaries might have to be a little bit more firm and a little bit more directive. And once again, it's self-preservation and it's kind of breaking a pattern that you're a part of. And so I guess it depends on kind of what the scenario is, but
Agreed. Like, I
Mhm.
think, a lot of what we've talked about in this context is coming from a place of like recognizing that maybe both parties have a mutual desire to be respectful,
Yes.
right? But that's not always going to be the case. And so
Mhm.
sometimes you might see that more direct boundaries are needed, right? And you may need to then kind of reflect on what boundaries do you need? Like, which ones are
Mhm.
more aligned for your wellness, your personal safety,
Yes.
your own like values, right?
Yeah. What's working for you? What's not working for you?
So I think like as we were kind of saying, right? Like boundaries
Mhm.
are really coming from a place of like love. And it's coming from a place of like respect, mutual respect, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
maybe a better word is parameters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so Simrat, what would be your not your auntie's advice for this particular piece?
Yeah. So I think my advice would be for any listener is to really kind of reflect on what boundary would you set if guilt was not in the way? Right? And so I think guilt can stop us from doing a lot that we want to do. And guilt is fueled by those expectations and the enmeshment potentially and the lack of boundaries. But if guilt wasn't a factor, what boundary would you want to put in place? And
Such
I
a powerful question.
yeah, yeah. And I think I would just leave it at that reflective question for now because I think that there's a lot for people to kind of sit with.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So much to unpack there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. That was Roots and Rishte podcast.
Thank you.